We had a system. We had confidence in the system. We knew it was safe. The result of 2020, from an administrative perspective, was that Florida had the most transparent and efficient election anywhere in the country.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. The GOP keeps giving away their big little lies. That was Florida's GOP Governor Ron DeSantis boasting about how safe and efficient and transparent his election was. Not only was it not broken, it was something to be held up and modeled. So the state's election security bill awaiting DeSantis' signature doesn't even get to masquerade as an election security bill. They should just call it what it is, Florida's voting obstacle course bill, or an exercise designed to make it harder to vote. Not safer, not more efficient, and definitely not more transparent. SB 90 is a Make Donald Trump Smile Again measure designed to goose Republican chances in a state already solidly leaning red by making it harder to vote in these specific ways. It will make voter registration more difficult. It will limit access to ballot drop boxes. And this one's really important. It makes it harder to obtain a mail-in ballot. Again, there was no widespread vote fraud in Florida, although there was an instance where a former Republican state senator was arrested for paying thousands to a sham candidate who would take votes away from the Democrat in that state Senate race. But in a twist that shows that karma is still a thing, the Washington Post reveals that Republican efforts just might backfire in Florida. Quote, virtually every narrow Republican victor of the past generation, and there have been many, including two of the state's current top office holders, DeSantis and Rick Scott, owes their victory, at least in part, to mail voting. Now, some Florida Republicans are reacting with alarm after the GOP-dominated state legislature, with DeSantis' support, passed a far-reaching bill Thursday night that puts new restrictions on the use of mail ballots. Not only are GOP lawmakers reversing statutes that their own predecessors put in place, but they're also curtailing a practice that millions of state Republicans use. That's despite former President Donald Trump's relentless and baseless claims that it invites fraud. When faced with the prospect that the new restrictions could hinder votes from elderly and military voters, groups who overwhelmingly have to vote by mail, tend to vote by mail, members of the Florida GOP panicked. The Post continues with this, quote, one former state party official who spoke anonymously said some Republicans briefly discussed whether lawmakers could exempt those two groups from the provision requiring voters to request mail ballots every election cycle. It's a comment which Greg Sargent of the Washington Post exposed for its hypocrisy. Sargent writing this, quote, this Republican source says Republicans were so worried that this key provision would dampen participation that they talked about getting lawmakers to exempt two of their key constituencies from it and to selectively apply it to other voters. It wouldn't pass legal muster and didn't go anywhere. It's quite a glimpse into the mindset of Republicans supposedly motivated by a pious desire to restore election integrity. The contortions Republicans are now putting themselves through to keep up the big lie is not limited to Florida politics. A piece in the New York Times Magazine says this, quote, Donald Trump's refusal to acknowledge his loss in the 2020 election has placed his party in the awkward position of denying its own down ballot successes in many states. This has been particularly striking in Texas, where the GOP was arguably better positioned than Republicans elsewhere to escape his gravitational pull. Texas Republicans performed better than expected in November, yet the state has nearly 50 bills under consideration that would restrict voting access. The GOP potentially shooting themselves in the foot in its war against voting access is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Eddie Glaude, chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, is here. Also joining us, Robert Gibbs, former Obama White House press secretary, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly, national chairman of the Serve America movement, is here. Lucky for us, all three MSNBC contributors. David Jolly, I'll start with you because I started with Florida. You know, I've had conversations with Republicans who say, well, Nicole, what's your problem with having to have an ID? And I said, this is not about me and my problems, but what is your interest in solving something that isn't a problem in the country? I mean, how do you get at the idiocy of laws just in search of problems that don't exist?
That's exactly the way to frame it. Nicole, public policy can often be devoid of critical thinking, and the new Florida voting law is a perfect example of that. As you mentioned, our governor, Ron DeSantis, the day after the election, said that the Florida election results should inspire confidence, that it should be a model for other states. He lauded the performance of Florida election integrity. But as the big lie seeped in, it also seeped into the Republican political narrative. And so naturally, you had a Republican-led legislature in Tallahassee have to carry on the notion of the big lie. And so they implemented a new what they call voter integrity bill, very much like the state of Georgia and other states as well. The bottom line, though, is, as you mentioned, it is a solution in search of a problem. But critically, it makes it harder to vote in Florida this year than it was last year. And I think that's the critical thing. Look, as a nation, voting should be as easy and accessible as it can be secure. We've solved security. We move billions of dollars a day on our phone, on our tablets, at our desktop. We could vote digitally using not social media platforms, but using app platforms on digital devices. That's the way we actually grow the vote. Instead, not only are we accepting today's paradigm of the limits of voting participation, but now we're rolling it back and going backwards. To your point, mail ballot voting in Florida has been a currency of the Republican Party for the modern GOP in the Sunshine State. This could very well hurt the GOP in razor-thin races that in Florida statewide are often decided by a point.
Wait, I like your point better. I mean, the answer isn't to fight these GOP suppression laws and try to eke out wins in these largely Republican legislatures. The fight should be to come up with something bigger, to come up with, online voting or voting on the phone. Is that something that you're involved in or pushing or know of?
Well, it certainly should be. And there are groups that are pushing it. Consider where we have moved digital participation in monetary platforms and social media platforms and cryptocurrencies. We have security provisions to allow for the digital transfer of billions of dollars of money. We can allow somebody to vote on their phone. We are accepting the paradigm that politicians have put in front of us, and we're arguing over election integrity provisions that reflect the technology of 50 years ago. The real debate over expanding access to more Americans, getting more Americans involved, particularly in disparate impacted communities where we see lower voter turnout, is to bring the vote to them, not to ask them to engage in these new procedural hurdles to be able to exercise their franchise. We're accepting a false narrative from Florida Republicans and Republicans across the country. They're doing so to gain favor with Donald Trump. But what they're doing is they're rolling back the franchise for generations.
Eddie, I started the last hour with Kevin McCarthy trying to purge Liz Cheney because she won't go along with the lie. And he can't have anyone in leadership who won't repeat the lie and be part of the lie. And I guess covering a story about voter suppression laws based on a lie is as enjoyable as sticking needles in my eyeballs. But we have to do it because this is what is happening. It's happening in 47 states. I think there are 108 bills at least. This one in Florida has passed the state legislature. The one in Texas is winding its way through. Republican governors in both states have signaled their intention to sign them. What happens next?
Well, we have to fight. We have to fight for our democracy, it seems to me, Nicole. I mean, let's be very clear. There is a direct line between what happened on January 6th and what we're seeing with these voter suppression laws. When you ask the question, what is a policy in search of a problem? Well, that's because when you ask that question, Nicole, in some ways you're attributing good faith to those who are engaged in this. We need to understand the underlying motivation. The underlying motivation is to restrict the size of the electorate. The underlying motivation is to somehow, curtail the effects and implications of the demographic shifts in the country. The underlying motivation is to stop in its tracks what we saw, in the November election, where you saw black folk and brown folk and young folk, all of these new voters showing up at the polls. And so what we see very clearly is this assault on our democracy. So we have to understand it for what it is and then respond accordingly. We have to respond accordingly because oftentimes we attribute good faith to these folk when in fact they are engaged in an all-out assault on our democracy, it seems to me.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.